when we get everything right at planting. It's a lot of fun to walk out in a cornfield at this time of year. And in this case, we're in the middle of a cornfield here today. Yes, we've made a cut through this field because we're using this as a teaching field where we have lots of different plots. So we bring a lot of growers in here and we talk about what has happened through the growing season. And in this case, this field's 30-inch corn planted at 35,000. And as we take a look at the 1,000 of an acre stretch, you get concerned because you can see that I have 4 small and late emerged plants. And since this was a plot, we intentionally set this plot up to fail. This corn was planted when it was extremely cold. And we've talked before about saturated cold germs and cold scores, where if plants aren't designed to take a cold drink of water on that first drink, it can really scramble the germ and set them back. In this case, we have 35 plants per 1,000 of an acre, but we're only going to have 31,000 ears. And you say, well, 31,000 ear count isn't bad, Greg. Yes, but at 7 bushel for every ear, that's 28 bushel we gave up because we came in and we looked at the calendar instead of ground conditions. And we said, it's April 20th, we've got to go. And realizing this corn just simply couldn't handle those cold conditions. It's never about the day we plant. This seed I'm holding in my hand is swollen up and is starting to take water through the pericarp. It's 36 hours after planting when a seed takes the water into the pericarp, and it's the temperature of that water that sets us up for the hoe season. So this plot is all about what style of corn you and I own at that time of year. And I want to make it very clear. It's not about Monsanto or Pioneer, Beck's Channel, or name the many 30 different seed companies. It's about what you and I own at that given time and how we manage it. So at our farm, and for the last 20 years, as soon as we get our seed in-house, we will send it to a seed lab to get it checked for what we call saturated cold germ. Simply that means they will chill that seed for about 7 days at 50 degrees. Then on the 8th day, they warm it up to 80 and they count how many germ. It's different than the cold germ that's on the bag. Most of that cold germ is 95 and above. We're talking about real-time conditions, such as a field condition, and it's real time for what affects the stand. So as we get those numbers back, we use that knowledge then to know when to plant that specific hybrid and what day. Let me give you an example. This year, for instance, I had the lowest saturated cold germs I've ever had in all the years I've checked. Some of our corn come back at 62%. So in other words, 38 seeds out of every 100, when they were chilled for 7 days in 50 degrees, wet soils, and then warmed up, just didn't flat out grow. At the same time, I had corn in our stockpile in the seed house that was 95% different in cold germ. That's basically an Eskimo. You could plant that 95% saturated cold germ anywhere and it will grow. So on the 20th of April, I parked my planters. Looking ahead to that Saturday, Sunday, I saw some extremely low temperatures and rain. It's the combination of both that make Greg extremely nervous. In the case of 30 hours of planting this plot, on that Friday morning, on Sunday morning in here, we had 40.6 degree temperatures when it took its first drink, well below the 50 degrees that we're concerned about. So in this case, let's take a look to see what we have. The first 2 rows off here to my right were 89%, same genetics now. A different lot in the center here was 65. And then the corn here right to my left was 95. So we start here with an Eskimo, we have a Florida beach bum that will never like a cold drink, and then we have pretty much average state of the run at an 89 to 90% here along the grass. So let's take a closer look and see exactly how this plot grow and how these plants respond. The key for us as growers, it's never about when we get the lab results back of saying and calling up our seed supplier and saying, are you kidding me? We need to return this seed. It's a 65% cold germ. The corn I'm kneeling in here at 65% is my highest yielding genetics. I'm not about returning it at all. I'm all about Greg managing it so that first drink is in a 55 to 60 degree soil. So where it was 40 degrees on that Sunday morning when it took its first drink, you can see the effect. As we compare to the other rows, so these two rows I'm kneeling in at 65, right next to me over here is 95, there's 6,000 difference in emergence. And that 6,000 comes from here where we see we have some plants missing. And so this guy here is a classic. He is stalled out, and he had the double whammy. We had rain and cold temperatures. And that's when you don't sleep well, when you've got a lot of corn planted 30 hours ahead of a weather event. So in this case, he just flat out gave up, and he couldn't go on any further. Right next to him, we have a late emerger, a very common scenario. He's not going to ear. He's going to be much less in diameter than the plants that are around us. You look at this plant right here by my knee. In this case, this guy is off and running, and he's off to the races. This guy is going to be behind all year, and there's going to be a cost to that. I moved over just 2 rows to the west, and you can see here we have almost ideal picture-perfect stands. We dropped 34,000, and we got 33,000 up here in a 1,007 acre. And it all comes about even emergence. And so I get pretty excited when I see corn that's all at the same stage, realizing the competition for sunlight and water and moisture. As we go through the growing season here, everybody here is created equal. So once again, at a 95% saturated cold germ, we have a 33,000 stand compared right over 2 rows away where we had a 65%, where we had less than about 26 to 27,000. So once again, you and I own this. This is not where we can turn around and point fingers at our seed supplier. This is where Greg's got to step up. As hard as it is to park planters, we have to get it right. So let's talk about the cost and some of the things we look at when we come into a field. The first thing I do when I come in a field is I'll take a look at the even of the ear set. I have a prime example here. You take this plant, and we count down from the flag leaf. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the 7th node is where we want this guy set. And if it would have been down on the 8th node, all that's telling us is that we had some pretty tough growing conditions. This plant can set an ear on any node. All of us have seen a plant out in the bare spot in the end rows of the field that'll have 5 ears set on it in the middle of a 4-foot circle. And so this plant's talking to us, and it said the growing conditions were really good. So he set, the higher the ear set, the higher the yield. So if he's on number 7, Greg's smiling. But there's a lot of things that come into play when we talk about corn themselves. Take a look at these 2 ears that I have right here. They're the same genetics, but they're treated different. This particular ear is 20 around, and it's all about girth. Remember, girth starts early in the season. How do we get out of the gate? Do we emerge even? What do you and I do for starter on our planter? Starter for me is simply about maximizing the most potential possible for this genetics. And you go here to this plot where we didn't do all the things right, and we snap this ear, and you can see this guy's only 14 around. We're over here in this plot where we did everything to the best of our ability. Look at the difference. Each row is worth 10 bushel to you. So in this case, this ear that I happen to grab is 20 around. Most of the ears in this starter plot are 18. But the minute you see this guy that's only 14 around, and so we got what? Almost 40 bushel right here. Now we can't blame this particular genetics of corn. This comes back to Greg. Does Greg have the patience? Does Greg got the ability to put liquid on a planter? And so all the things we talk about at 360 Yield Center about nitrogen on the planter, and starter on the planter. It's about getting out of the gate in the proper way. When we go start talking about nitrogen though, now we're talking about length. This guy that was 20 around was 36 long. And so if we'd run this plant out of nitrogen after it's up and growing, now remember, when he's V5, he's still living off mama seed. And then those new crown roots start to look for nutrients. And that's where the Bandit on the planter starts to really hit home runs. So in this field, Bandit was being used, 3 inches on each side of that stalk. We had 70 units of nitrogen. And so when we start talking about putting on the maximum length, this plant had every opportunity to maximize its potential. Then the last thing we talk about, so we talk about girth first, starter, early nitrogen on the planter. That early nitrogen planter carries this into length, and of course the wide drop finishes it. Wide drop's about making sure we do never run this, that plant never has a bad day. As we go down the row here and we look at these ears are 18 around and 36 to 38 long, and I got a smile on my face. This corn's checking almost 250. Now, I would give anything if we didn't have some of these late emergers. So instead of being 31 ears, they were 35. That could get pretty exciting. Then the last thing we worry about in corn production is how many kernels do we finish long and the depth of kernel. You know, I had a lot of growers talking to me about in central Illinois, we got perfect growing conditions this year. We got rains when we needed it. And so they're saying, you know, can it yield 300, Greg? Absolutely. But what it's going to take is depth of kernel. So when I talk about depth of kernel, how do you and I manage the last 30 days of the 60 days of this crop? Do we let disease come in? And you can see it here. And we talk about this leaf is 3 leaves below. And you can see here that the gray leaf likes this variety. And we got gray leaf all across my farming operation. So for Greg, every acre got undercover with a fungicide, because we're all about protecting the yield that's going to come out of depth of kernel. The more starch you and I can put into this ear, the more yield we're going to have. Yes, we're going to have a lot of 240 and 250 corn. What's going to make it 280? If you see those spots in the field that are 280 and 300 on the yield monitor, that means we protected this all the way along. And it's an absolute must that we protect the ear leaf itself, because the ear leaf is your golden ticket. And in this case, this hybrid being really successful to gray leaf, I see 1, 2, 3, I see 4 different lesions on the ear leaf. But it's drastically different than what you see down below, because gray leaf comes from the bottom up. So my team and I, we were able to protect this crop pretty well. And so we believe that we can take it and finish strong. And what do we need to finish strong? The kind of day that we're having here as we film. Beautiful sunshine, a light breeze, and these leaves are just packing the sugar and calories into this ear itself. We also know that we had a pretty dry planting window. And we saw a lot of guys in our area doing tillage. And you remember the field that went in. Let's take a look at that field. This field was worked 5 days ahead of planting. Look at the different sizes of plants. We got plants in here that are almost boot tall, and we got plants in here that are what? Maybe 2.5 inches tall? That's way too much spread from plant to plant. We talk about it all the time. After you get a collar difference in height, 2 collars, this little guy here is just a weed. And so if we stay close, if we're going to do tillage, and some growers do, you need to stay close to the planter. Moisture is always king. So first drink temperature in, adequate moisture, running that planter correctly when it comes to speed and singulation. Those are all things that matter. And anytime you and I walk in the field and we see a little guy like this, that's what? A 1/4 difference in diameter than the one next to it, you realize this guy is not going to perform at all. And so we take a look here at his ear, and you can see the difference. This becomes what? This is just a weed. And so as we look at the difference in these 2 ears, this one's not going to pay. The problem is I wrote a check for that seed. And so You and I can control a lot what happens. Let's go back a few weeks though in this field earlier when we were talking about starter fertilizer on the planter. And we were looking at the 360 dash system and understanding the importance of getting this plant out of the gate right. We talk about the advantages of starter fertilizer on young corn plants. And the roots, a lot of times, as you can see, these young roots here are following exactly down the seed trench. In other words, they're following the planter. In the seed V, the roots are staying in close. So in this case, if we come in and we put a dash of 1034O or low salt fertilizer right on the seed itself, these roots are right in the feeding zone. And there should be some extremely good activity there. And this young plant, even though he's young, should have some good phosphates coming right up inside of him. And it's going to help us at harvest. We're going to have plants that are drier, by as much as 1.5 points drier at harvest. We're always going to get that plant quicker to harvest. If I was going to be in this late planting season, and we've had a late planting season all across the country this year, I can plant 110-day corn. Maybe if your neighbor can only plant 105, but I can get almost 10 maturity days quicker to harvest by using starter fertilizer early in this plant's life. So the roots are going to run right with the row. There's going to be some that break out, but without question, a dash of starter put in the right spot can return some pretty big dollars. All of us enjoy that thrill and that rush after the first day of planting, when we know things are set on the planter and we're ready to go, and we enjoy the feeling of the last day of planting, when we say, we did all that we could. Then we come out in the field at this stage, and the corn, listening to the corn always tells us the story of how we did. And when I see plants like this, I realize I have to go back and adjust. And we have to fine-tune our system so that we get ears like this. And that fills the grain tank in the middle of harvest.